In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where alien empires rise and fall like cosmic tides, there exists a universal truth that every species has learned to respect. Never underestimate a human's capacity for violence when someone they love is threatened. The Zephyrian Council thought they understood this principle. They had studied human psychology, analyzed their military tactics, and even incorporated human mercenaries into their ranks. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They assumed that a human's bond extended only to other humans. Marcus Kane had been the most decorated super soldier in the Terran Defense Corps before he walked away from it all. Enhanced beyond normal human limits, carrying enough firepower in his augmented body to level city blocks, he had chosen peace over war, isolation over glory. He lived quietly on the frontier moon of Kepler, 442c, with only one companion, a loyal German shepherd named Rex, genetically enhanced to survive in alien atmospheres. But peace, as Marcus would soon remember, is a luxury that the galaxy rarely affords to those who've tasted war. When the Zephyrian raiders descended from the crimson skies of Kepler, 442c, they expected to find easy prey. Scattered human colonists, minimal defenses, and valuable resources ripe for the taking. What they found instead was a sleeping giant whose only weakness they were about to exploit. They took his dog, and in doing so they awakened something that should have remained buried forever. The monster that Marcus Kane had spent 5 years trying to forget he could become. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had earned their reputation as the most feared warriors in known space, and why some sleeping dogs and their masters should never be disturbed. The morning sun of Kepler. 442c cast long purple shadows across the crystalline plains as Marcus Kane stepped onto the porch of his modest homestead. The air tasted of copper and ozone, a constant reminder that this world belonged to no human originally. Yet after 5 years, this alien moon felt more like home than Earth ever had. Rex bounded ahead, his enhanced muscles rippling beneath his dark coat as he chased something only his augmented senses could detect. The German shepherd had been Marcus's only companion since he'd left the Terran Defense Corps, and watching the dog's simple joy and exploration never failed to ease the weight that pressed against Marcus's chest. Memories of worlds burning, of friends dying, of the monster he'd become in service to humanity's expansion.
Marcus rolled his shoulders, feeling the familiar hum of dormant nanobots beneath his skin.
5 years since he'd last activated his combat protocols, but the enhancements remained, waiting. Enhanced strength that could punch through starship hulls, reflexes that operated faster than conscious thought, and enough integrated weaponry to make him a one-man army. All of it powered down, sleeping. Like the soldier he tried so hard to stop being. The settlement of Haven's Rest lay 15 kilometers to the east, visible as a cluster of biodomes against the horizon. 237 colonists called this place home, mostly farmers and researchers who'd come seeking a fresh start, far from the politics of the core worlds. Marcus made the trip to town once a month for supplies, but otherwise kept to himself. The colonists knew him only as the quiet man who lived alone in the wilderness, not as the weapon of mass destruction he'd once been. Rex's sudden bark snapped Marcus from his thoughts. The dog stood rigid at the edge of the property, his enhanced ears picking up something beyond human perception. Marcus frowned, extending his own augmented hearing. There, a low thrumming, barely audible, coming from the upper atmosphere. Ships. Marcus's hand moved instinctively toward the inactive plasma rifle mounted by his door, then stopped. Pirates occasionally hit the outer colonies, but Haven's Rest had nothing worth stealing. The colonists were poor, their crops barely sufficient for local consumption. Most raiders passed by without bothering to make planetfall. The thrumming grew louder. Rex growl deepened, his hackles rising. The dog's genetic modifications included enhanced threat assessment, and right now every instinct was screaming danger. Marcus felt his own dormant systems beginning to stir, combat subroutines running diagnostic checks without his conscious command. Through the thin atmosphere came the first glimpse of the ships. Sleek, predatory vessels with the distinctive curved hulls of Zephyrian raiders. Marcus counted 7 ships, more than enough to overwhelm Haven's Rest's minimal defenses. His jaw tightened as he watched them adjust their trajectory, clearly heading for the settlement. "Damn," he muttered, already moving towards his communications array. Whatever the Zephyrians wanted, the colonists didn't deserve to face it alone. The comm channel to Haven's Rest crackled to life. "Marcus, thank God you're there." Sarah Chen's voice carried barely controlled panic. As the settlement's administrator, she'd dealt with her share of crises, but nothing like this. "We've got incoming ships, 7 Zephyrian raiders, ETA 12 minutes. I see them, Marcus replied, his fingers dancing across the console. What are your defensive capabilities? 2 pulse turrets, both offline for maintenance. We've got maybe 30 colonists with hunting rifles. Marcus, we don't stand a chance. Marcus closed his eyes. He'd walked away from war for a reason. The things he'd done, the lives he'd taken, he'd sworn never to become that person again. But looking at Rex, seeing the trust in those enhanced brown eyes, he felt something shift inside him. Sarah, get everyone to the central biodome. Lock it down and wait for my signal. What are you going to do? Marcus glanced at his reflection in the dark screen of his tactical display. 5 years of peace had softened his features, but underneath lay the angular planes of a killer. I'm going to remind some people why humans are feared across the galaxy. He cut the connection and turned to Rex. The dog watched him with intelligent eyes, sensing the change that was coming. Sorry, boy, looks like our quiet life just ended. The first explosion echoed across the plains as the Zephyrian ships opened fire on Haven's Rest. Marcus could see the flashes of energy weapons in the distance, could imagine the terror of the colonists huddled in their emergency shelters. His hands moved to the biometric locks on his equipment cases. 15 minutes later, Marcus Kane ceased to exist. In his place stood something that had once been called many things: the Terran Ghost, the Worldbreaker, humanity's wrath. The enhanced combat suit flowed like liquid metal over his frame, interfacing directly with his nervous system. Weapon ports opened along his arms and back, revealing an arsenal that could level city blocks. His helmet sealed with a soft hiss, and suddenly, the world exploded into tactical data streams. Enemy positions highlighted in red. Threat assessments cascaded across his vision. Ammunition counters showed full loads of experimental weapons that most galactic powers had banned as too inhumane for warfare. The nanobots in his bloodstream sang with renewed purpose, flooding his system with combat stimulants and sensory enhancers. Marcus felt the familiar coldness settle over his mind, the emotionless calculation that had made him the most effective killer in human space. He'd tried to bury it, tried to pretend it didn't exist, but it had always been there, waiting. Rex whined softly, sensing the transformation. Marcus knelt beside the dog, his armored hand gentle against the animal's head. I know, boy. I don't like this either. But sometimes the monster is exactly what the world needs. The tactical display showed the Zephyrian ships had landed near Haven's Rest. Armed figures were moving through the settlement, rounding up colonists. Standard raider protocol: take hostages, demand ransom, or slaves, disappear into the void. Simple, efficient, and about to become very, very costly. Marcus activated his hoverbike and whistled for Rex. The dog leaped onto the reinforced passenger section, his own enhancement protocols engaging. Together, they raced across the crystalline plains toward a reunion with violence that Marcus had hoped never to experience again. But as they crested the ridge overlooking Haven's Rest, what he saw made the cold fury in his chest burn hotter than any star. The Zephyrians had set up a processing station in the town square. Colonists knelt in rows, their hands bound behind them. The raiders moved among them with casual cruelty, scanning each human for medical augmentations or useful skills. Those deemed valuable were loaded into transport cages. The rest? Marcus watched a young mother plead for her child as a Zephyrian warrior casually backhanded her to the ground. Watched elderly colonists stumble under the weight of restrained shackles. Watched his peaceful neighbors, people who'd never hurt anyone, being treated like livestock. The tactical computer in his helmet identified targets, calculated firing solutions, and estimated casualties with cold precision. 43 Zephyrians spread throughout the settlement. Standard armament and battle armor. Combat effectiveness rated at 60% against normal human resistance. Against a Terran super soldier? The computer couldn't even calculate odds that low. Marcus was about to give the order to attack when he noticed something that made his enhanced heart skip a beat. Rex had gone rigid beside him, a low growl building in the dog's throat. Following the animal's gaze, Marcus saw a cluster of Zephyrian soldiers near the settlement's edge. They were dragging something toward their ships, something that barked and struggled against their grip. Another dog, a golden retriever probably belonging to one of the families. The animal fought desperately as the aliens loaded it into a specimen container aboard their ship. They're taking pets, Marcus whispered, the words barely audible through his helmet's external speakers. The realization hit him like a plasma bolt to the chest. These weren't just raiders looking for quick profit. They were xenobiologists, collecting specimens for whatever twisted experiments the Zephyrian science cast conducted. Rex's growl deepened, and Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. Not break, crack, like ice under pressure. All the careful control he'd built, All the meditation and isolation and desperate attempts to find peace, it all cracked at the sight of that terrified animal, being caged by creatures who saw Earth's creatures as nothing more than interesting specimens. "No," he said quietly. Then, louder, his voice carrying the weight of 5 years of suppressed rage, "No." The combat protocols engaged fully, flooding his system with enhancement drugs and battle stims. His weapon systems came online with predatory hums. Target locks appeared across his vision like crimson stars. Marcus came, the peaceful hermit, the man who'd tried so hard to leave war behind, died in that moment. What remained was something far more dangerous, a super soldier who just remembered exactly why he'd earned his reputation as the most feared killer in human space. And someone had just threatened his dog. The Zephyrians were about to learn a lesson that every species in the galaxy knew but often forgot. Humans were protective of their pack. All of their pack. Marcus rose from cover, his weapons spinning up with barely audible whines. Rex sensed the change and settled into a combat crouch, his own enhancements preparing for battle. "Time to remind the galaxy what happens," Marcus whispered, "when you mess with the wrong species." The first plasma bolt lit up the afternoon sky like a falling star, and the Zephyrians' easy day of raiding became a nightmare that would haunt their species' military doctrine for generations to come. The first Zephyrian died before he knew death was coming. Marcus's opening shot vaporized the alien's upper torso, the superheated plasma turning chitin and flesh into glowing mist. The raider had been standing guard over a group of kneeling colonists. His weapon lowered, attention focused on inventory tablets rather than perimeter security, a mistake that cost him everything. Chaos erupted through Haven's Rest as the remaining Zephyrians scrambled to understand what had just happened. Their enhanced hearing picked up the distinctive whine of charging plasma weapons, but the shots seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Marcus moved like a ghost through the settlement's outer buildings, his stealth systems rendering him nearly invisible as he unleashed precisely targeted death. 2 more guards fell in rapid succession, their positions carefully chosen to avoid collateral damage to the colonists. Marcus's enhanced reflexes processed the tactical situation faster than conscious thought. 40 remaining hostiles. 17 had clear lines of fire to civilian positions. Priority targets identified and marked. Rex moved beside him like a shadow, the dog's enhanced senses providing additional battlefield intelligence. The German Shepherd's genetic modifications included tactical awareness protocols that made him an ideal combat companion. Where Marcus saw heat signatures and weapon signatures, Rex detected emotional states, fear pheromones, and subtle body language that revealed enemy intentions. A Zephyrian squad leader barked orders in their clicking language, gesturing toward the outer perimeter with 2 of his 4 arms. The aliens were methodical fighters, evolved from pack hunters on their homeworld. They didn't panic easily, but they also didn't understand what they were facing. Marcus smiled grimly inside his helmet. Good. Let them think they were dealing with a conventional threat. His next shot came from an entirely different angle, punching through the squad leader's cranial ridge and dropping the alien in a spray of fluorescent blood. The remaining Zephyrians immediately formed defensive positions, using their advanced weaponry to lay down suppressing fire toward his last known location. Marcus was already gone. The enhanced combat suit's adaptive camouflage shifted colors and textures as he moved, matching the crystalline walls of the buildings around him. His footsteps made no sound on the settlement's pathways, the suit's shock absorbers distributing his weight perfectly. To the Zephyrian senses, he was little more than a heat mirage in the afternoon air. From his new position, Marcus watched the aliens' tactical display through his helmet's intelligence-gathering systems. They were coordinating well, establishing overlapping fields of fire and securing the most valuable hostages in the center of their formation. Professional soldiers, not the usual rabble that hit frontier colonies, which made what he was about to do even more satisfying. Marcus activated his shoulder-mounted missile pods and painted 6 targets simultaneously. The micro-missiles launched in complete silence, their trajectories calculated to strike within microseconds of each other. The explosions lit up the settlement's central square like fireworks, and suddenly, 6 more Zephyrians ceased to exist. Now the aliens started to understand what they were dealing with. Military-grade enhancement protocols, one of them screamed in accented galactic standard, were facing a Terran supersoldier. The words sent visible ripples of fear through their ranks. Every military force in the galaxy knew about human supersoldiers. They were legends whispered around alien command centers, cautionary tales told to young warriors about the consequences of underestimating human warfare. Most species had encountered them during the expansion wars, and none had pleasant memories. Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he watched the Zephyrians' formation begin to falter. Fear was a weapon as effective as any plasma rifle. And right now, these raiders were learning exactly why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's apex predators. But satisfaction turned to cold fury as he watched the alien commander gesture toward the transport cages. The message was clear: execute the hostages if the attack continued. Marcus's tactical computer immediately began calculating rescue scenarios, but every projection showed unacceptable civilian casualties. The Zephyrians had positioned themselves perfectly to use the colonists as human shields, their professional training evident in every movement. Rex whined softly beside him, sensing his master's frustration. The dog's enhanced intelligence understood the tactical situation as clearly as Marcus did. They needed a distraction, something to draw the aliens' attention away from the hostages long enough for a rescue operation. Marcus looked down at his companion and felt something twist in his chest. 5 years ago, he would have made this decision without hesitation. Send in the assault team, accept the losses, complete the mission. Cold calculation in service of the greater good. But 5 years of peace had changed him. These weren't soldiers under his command. They were innocent people who'd come to this moon seeking nothing more than a quiet life. They deserved better than becoming acceptable casualties in someone else's war. Change of plans, boy, Marcus whispered to Rex. We're going to do this the hard way. He activated his communications array and hijacked the Zephyrian's tactical frequency. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority, the tone of a predator addressing prey. Zephyrian Raiders, this is Marcus Kane, formerly of the Terran Defense Corps. You have 30 seconds to release your hostages and withdraw from this world. Silence stretched across the channel for several heartbeats. Then the alien commander's voice crackled through, heavy with disbelief and growing fear. Marcus Kane, the world breaker? That's impossible. Intelligence reports indicated you retired from active service. Intelligence reports were wrong, Marcus replied, his voice devoid of emotion. 20 seconds. You're bluffing. One soldier, even enhanced, cannot stand against our entire force. Marcus's response was to paint the commander's position with a targeting laser visible to every Zephyrian in the settlement. The alien's heat signature bloomed bright red on every tactical display, marking him for death with surgical precision. 15 seconds. Marcus watched through his enhanced optics as the alien gestured frantically to his subordinates. The universal language of fear needed no translation. We have valuable hostages, human civilians. Surely you won't risk their lives for the sake of your primitive emotional attachments? Marcus felt something cold and terrible settle over his mind. The clinical detachment of a professional killer, honed by years of warfare and tempered by loss. When he spoke again, his voice carried the promise of inevitable death. You misunderstand the situation. Those aren't hostages, they're my neighbors. And the question isn't whether I'll risk their lives. His targeting laser swept across the settlement, painting targets with methodical precision. The question is whether you're prepared to face the consequences of threatening them. 10 seconds. Panic began to spread through the Zephyrian ranks. Several of the younger warriors glanced toward their ships, calculating escape routes. But their commander held them in position through sheer force of will, his forearms gesturing commands that kept them anchored to their formation. You're bluffing, the alien repeated, but his voice carried less conviction now. No one soldier, regardless of enhancement, can. Marcus didn't let him finish. His next shot wasn't aimed at the commander, but at the power coupling of the nearest transport cage. The precision blast disabled the energy bars without causing an explosion, and suddenly 20 colonists were free to run. 5 seconds. The tactical display showed the Zephyrians' formation beginning to collapse as individual warriors broke toward their ships. Fear was contagious among pack hunters, and watching their prey demonstrate superior firepower triggered deep evolutionary responses. But the commander held his ground, his weapon trained on the remaining hostages. Professional soldiers knew how to function through fear, and this one had clearly seen enough combat to understand his options. Stand down, human, or these civilians die. Marcus rose from concealment, his enhanced form visible to every alien in the settlement. The combat suit made him appear larger than life, weapon systems humming with barely contained violence. His helmet's external speakers carried his voice across the square with perfect clarity. No, he said simply. They don't. What happened next would be discussed in Zephyrian military academies for decades to come, usually in classes titled, Why Human Super Soldiers Are Classified as Strategic Weapons. Marcus moved. His enhanced reflexes operated faster than conscious thought. the nanobots in his bloodstream accelerating his nervous system to superhuman speeds. To the Zephyrians, he seemed to teleport across the settlement square, covering 50 meters of open ground in less than a heartbeat. The commander's weapon never had a chance to fire. Marcus's armored fist connected with the alien's cranial ridge, and the sound of shattering chitin echoed across the square. The raider dropped like a falling stone, his weapon clattering uselessly across the crystalline pavement. Rex bounded into the chaos, his enhanced speed allowing him to weave between alien legs and snap restraint cables with surgically precise bites. The dog had been trained for exactly this kind of operation, and he moved through the rescue with professional efficiency. The remaining Zephyrians found themselves caught between terror and tactical necessity. Their commander was down, their formation was broken, and a human super soldier was systematically dismantling their operation with ruthless precision. Several broke and ran for their ships, abandoning their posts in favor of survival, but not all of them. A warrior near the specimen containers raised his weapon toward the caged animals, his intention clear. If he couldn't complete the original mission, he would at least deny the humans their victory by destroying what they sought to protect. Marcus saw the movement and felt time slow to a crawl. His enhanced nervous system processed the trajectory, calculated the timing, and reached a conclusion that made his heart stop. He was too far away. Even with his enhanced speed, even with all the technology and training that made him a one-man army, he couldn't reach the cage before the warrior fired. But Rex could. The German shepherd launched himself across the square with enhanced muscles bunching like coiled steel. The dog's trajectory carried him directly between the Zephyrian's weapon and the caged animals, his body interposing itself as a living shield. The plasma bolt took Rex in the shoulder, spinning the dog through the air before he crashed against the settlement's central fountain. He hit the crystalline structure with a sound that made Marcus's enhanced hearing recoil, then lay still in a spreading pool of red. For a moment that stretched into eternity, Marcus Kane simply stared. The professional soldier, the enhanced warrior, the man who'd faced down entire armies without flinching, all of it just stopped. Rex wasn't moving, and in that crystalline moment of absolute silence, something inside Marcus Kane didn't just crack. It shattered completely. The Zephyrian warrior who'd fired the shot looked down at the fallen dog and made a sound that might have been satisfaction. He raised his weapon toward the cages again, intent on finishing what he'd started. He never got the chance. What erupted from Marcus in that moment wasn't enhanced human capabilities or advanced technology. It was something far more primitive and infinitely more dangerous. The concentrated fury of a species that had clawed its way to the top of the evolutionary ladder through sheer bloody-minded determination. Marcus moved across the square like a force of nature, his weapon systems forgotten in favor of something more personal. His armored hands closed around the Zephyrian's throat, and the alien's weapon clattered to the ground as he was lifted bodily into the air. "You shot my dog," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment. The Zephyrian tried to speak, tried to plead, but Marcus wasn't listening anymore. The cold professional killer was gone, replaced by something that existed beyond tactics and strategy and measured response. The alien's neck snapped with a sound like breaking crystal. Marcus dropped the body and turned toward the remaining raiders. What they saw on his helmet's optical displays made them take an involuntary step backward. No longer the controlled aggression of a professional soldier, but something that burned with the fury of 10,000 years of human evolution. "Run," Marcus whispered, his voice carrying across the square with terrible clarity. They ran. The surviving Zephyrians abandoned their equipment, their mission, and their wounded as they fled toward their ships. Engines screamed to life as vessels lifted off with barely coordinated haste, their pilots more concerned with escape than formation flying. Within minutes, the skies above Haven's Rest were clear. Marcus knelt beside Rex's still form, his armored hands gentle as they checked for vital signs. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady, the enhanced physiology already beginning to heal the damage from the plasma burn. Serious injuries but survivable with proper medical attention. Relief flooded through Marcus's system like a physical force, followed immediately by the realization of what he'd just become again. The monster he'd spent 5 years trying to bury had emerged stronger than ever, fed by rage and the primitive need to protect what mattered most. Sarah Chen's voice crackled through his comm system. "Marcus? Marcus, are you all right? We saw the ships leaving." Marcus looked around the settlement square at the scattered bodies of the Zephyrian raiders. At the colonists slowly emerging from cover, their faces showing equal measures of gratitude and fear. At Rex, wounded but alive in his arms. "I'm fine," he lied. "Get a medical team to the square. And Sarah, send a priority message to Terran Command. Tell them Marcus Kane is back in business. As he carried Rex toward the medical center, Marcus felt the familiar weight of his old life settling back onto his shoulders. The peaceful hermit was gone, probably forever. In his place stood something that the galaxy would soon remember to fear. The Zephyrians had taken his quiet life, but more importantly, they'd hurt his dog. And that was a mistake that would cost them far more than they could possibly imagine. 3 days after the raid on Haven's Rest, the Zephyrian High Command received a transmission that would fundamentally alter their species' relationship with humanity. Admiral Kexthara stood before the holographic display in the war room of the Dreadnought Sovereign's Vengeance, her 4 arms crossed in a gesture of barely controlled fury. Around her, the greatest military minds of the Zephyrian Empire studied the tactical footage with expressions ranging from disbelief to outright terror. "Play it again," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd conquered 17 star systems. The hologram flickered to life, showing the settlement of Haven's Rest from orbital surveillance. 43 Zephyrian warriors, professional soldiers with decades of combat experience, being systematically dismantled by a single human. The footage was clinical, precise, and absolutely devastating to Zephyrian military doctrine. "Analysis?" Kexthara demanded. General Vorthak, the Empire's leading expert on human combat capabilities, manipulated the display with nervous precision. Target designation, Marcus Kane, formerly of the Terran Defense Corps. Classification, Super Soldier, Category Alpha. Combat Effectiveness Rating. He paused, checking his calculations twice. "Off the standard scale, Admiral. Impossible. No single warrior, regardless of enhancement, can achieve these results. With respect, Admiral, this is Marcus Kane." Intelligence files indicate he was responsible for the destruction of our forward base at Arcturus Prime during the border conflicts. Single-handedly eliminated an entire garrison of 300 warriors. Kexthara's mandibles clicked together in the Zephyrian equivalent of a grimace. She remembered Arcturus Prime. The official reports had blamed the base's destruction on a Terran strike force, possibly supported by orbital bombardment. The idea that one enhanced human had been responsible was unsettling. What are his current status and location? Unknown. Our surviving raiders report that he identified himself by name and former unit designation. Terran Command has been completely silent regarding his reactivation, but intelligence suggests he's operating independently. The Admiral studied the tactical display, her enhanced intellect processing implications that sent shivers down her chitinous spine. A rogue human super soldier with a personal grievance against the Zephyrian Empire. An enemy with unlimited freedom of action and no political constraints. Recommendations? General Vorthak consulted his tactical computers, but his expression suggested the answers weren't encouraging. Standard protocol for dealing with Terran super soldiers is to avoid engagement whenever possible. If engagement becomes unavoidable, recommended force strength is 3 full battalions with air support and orbital bombardment capabilities. To deal with one human? Admiral, Marcus Kane isn't just any human. During the border conflicts, Terran intelligence designated him as a strategic asset equivalent to a heavy cruiser. His enhancement package includes... The display flickered as new data streamed in from the Empire's intelligence networks. Kexthara read the incoming reports with growing unease. What is it? Admiral, we're receiving reports from across Sector 7. Zephyrian shipping has been under attack for the past 72 hours. Military transports, supply convoys, even civilian vessels. The attacks are precise. Vorthak's 4 hands danced across his controls, bringing up a tactical map of the sector. Red markers appeared at 17 different locations, each one representing a successful attack on Zephyrian assets. The pattern suggests a single operator with detailed knowledge of our shipping schedules and convoy routes. No survivors have been left to report tactical specifics, but the destruction is consistent with advanced human weapons technology. Kexthara studied the pattern and felt something cold settle in her thorax. The attacks weren't random. They showed intimate knowledge of Zephyrian military logistics, the kind of information that could only come from captured databases or interrogated personnel. He's hunting us, she said quietly. Admiral? Marcus Kane. He's not just striking back for the raid on his settlement. He's conducting a systematic campaign to cripple our operations in this sector. Her mandibles clicked together again, faster this time. Show me the latest attack. The holographic display shifted, showing wreckage that had once been the heavy transport, Glorious Conquest. The vessel had been carrying 3 companies of Zephyrian Marines toward a garrison assignment on the frontier. Now it drifted as expanding debris in the void. Its hull split open like a cracked egg. Preliminary analysis suggests the attack lasted less than 4 minutes, Vorthak reported. A single vessel, probably a modified human fighter, engaged the transport and its escort. The escorts were destroyed first, followed by systematic targeting of the transport's critical systems. Casualties:
Total:
437 crew and passengers. Kekstara closed her eyes, a gesture learned from studying human behavior. In 3 days, one rogue human had inflicted more damage on her forces than entire rebel fleets had managed in months of conventional warfare. Admiral, there's more. Vorthak's voice carried a note of fear that she'd never heard from the veteran officer. The attacks are escalating. Each engagement shows improved tactical awareness and better intelligence about our operations. It's as if he's learning from each encounter. The implications hit Kekstara like a physical blow. Human super soldiers were known for their adaptive capabilities, their ability to process and integrate new information at superhuman speeds. If Marcus Kane was systematically studying Zephyrian tactics while simultaneously destroying their assets, how long until he adapts completely to our standard defensive procedures? Vorthak consulted his tactical computers, running probability matrices that painted an increasingly grim picture. Based on observed learning curves and escalation patterns, approximately 6 to 8 days. After that, standard Zephyrian vessels will be effectively defenseless against his attacks. Recommendations? Immediate withdrawal from Sector 7, full fleet reorganization under heavy escort protocols. And Admiral Vorthak paused, his military bearing warring with what he was about to suggest. Perhaps it's time to consider negotiation. Shakastara's 4 arms tensed simultaneously. The idea of negotiating with a single human, regardless of his capabilities, went against everything the Zephyrian Empire represented. They were conquerors, apex predators, evolved from pack hunters who dominated their homeworld through superior tactics and overwhelming force. But the tactical display showed a different story. 17 successful attacks, 0 friendly survivors. An enemy who seemed to possess supernatural knowledge of their operations and the firepower to act on that knowledge with devastating effect. What would he want? She asked finally. Based on psychological profiles of human super soldiers, probably revenge for the raid on his settlement. The death or injury of creatures under his protection would trigger significant emotional responses in most humans. Kekstara pulled up the original raid reports, scanning through them with renewed attention to detail. The operation had been a minor affair, a simple resource grab on an insignificant frontier colony. The raiders had followed standard protocols, securing valuable assets and eliminating resistance. But reading between the lines, she began to see how catastrophically wrong everything had gone. They took animals, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Admiral? The raid report mentions biological specimens of potential scientific value. They took the humans' companion animals. Kekstara felt her thorax constrict as understanding dawned. General, what do you know about human bonding behaviors? Vorthak accessed his cultural database, though his expression suggested he knew where this was leading. Humans form emotional attachments to other species, particularly domesticated animals they refer to as pets. These relationships often carry significance equal to family bonds. And we took them. Yes, Admiral. From Marcus Kane's perspective, we attacked his family. The war room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humans were known throughout the galaxy for their protective instincts, their willingness to fight overwhelming odds when defending those they considered family. But the idea that this extended to other species... Admiral, incoming priority transmission.
Kekstara gestured for the communication to be displayed.
The holographic projector flickered to life, showing the bridge of what appeared to be a modified Terran fighter. And standing in the center of that bridge, his enhanced frame filling the display, was Marcus Kane. Even through the holographic medium, his presence was intimidating. The combat suit had been modified with additional weapon systems, and visible battle damage suggested recent engagements. But it was his eyes that captured Kekstara's attention, cold, calculating, and filled with the kind of focused hatred that had leveled civilizations. Admiral Kekstara, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the void with perfect clarity. I believe we need to talk. How did you penetrate your communications? Simple. I've been studying your technology every time I destroy one of your ships. Zephyrian encryption is impressive, but not beyond human capabilities. His smile held no warmth. I wanted to give you the opportunity to surrender. Kekstara felt her mandibles click together involuntarily. The casual confidence in his voice was more unsettling than any threat could have been. Surrender? You're one human against the might of the Zephyrian Empire. That's what your raiders thought when they attacked Haven's Rest. How did that work out for them? Marcus gestured, and the display split to show tactical footage from his recent attacks. Ship after ship dying under precisely targeted fire. I've destroyed 17 of your vessels in 3 days. At this rate, you'll be completely eliminated from Sector 7 within 2 weeks. What do you want? Marcus's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Justice. Your raiders attacked a peaceful settlement, terrorized innocent civilians, and kidnapped companion animals for experimentation. That debt requires payment. We can negotiate compensation. No. The word cut across the communication channel with absolute finality. This isn't about money. This is about consequences. Kexthara accessed her tactical displays, calculating fleet positions and response times. She had enough firepower in nearby systems to glass entire worlds, but the human had demonstrated an unsettling ability to strike before defenders could respond. What are your terms? Simple. Complete withdrawal from Sector 7, immediate cessation of all raids against human colonies, and full disclosure of what happened to the animals your people took from Haven's Rest. The last demand made Kexthara's blood run cold. The biological specimens from the raid had been shipped to the Empire Xenobiology Research Station at Kepler 438b, where they would be subjected to comprehensive study. Dissection, genetic analysis, behavioral modification. Standard protocols for interesting alien life forms. The specimens have already been transferred to our research facilities for scientific study. Marx's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the war room seemed to drop several degrees. When he spoke again, his voice carried the promise of inevitable death. Then you have 48 hours to return them. Unharmed. All of them. That's impossible. The research station is 3 days' travel from here, and the specimens may have already been... 48 hours, Marcus repeated. After that, I stop targeting your military assets and start targeting your core worlds. The communication cut off, leaving the war room in stunned silence. Kexthara stared at the empty holographic display, her enhanced mind trying to process what she'd just heard. A single human had just threatened to attack the heart of the Zephyrian Empire. And based on what she'd seen over the past 3 days, she was beginning to believe he could do it. General, she said quietly, get me a priority channel to the research station and initiate emergency fleet recall protocols. I want every available ship in this sector within 12 hours. Admiral, surely you're not considering... Marcus Kane just declared war on the Zephyrian Empire, and based on his track record, we might already be losing. As alarms began to sound throughout the dreadnought, Kexthara found herself wondering if there was any force in the galaxy that could stop a human super soldier with nothing left to lose. The tactical computers offered probability matrices and strategic assessments, but none of them could quantify the most dangerous variable in the equation. Human determination, and Marcus Kane had just demonstrated exactly how dangerous that could be. The Zephyrian Research Station at Kepler 438b had been designed to study the most dangerous biological specimens in known space. Its defensive systems could withstand assault by full battle fleets, and its isolation in the system's outer asteroid belt made surprise attacks virtually impossible. Zentharara had spent 15 years at the facility, cataloguing the biological diversity of hundreds of worlds. In her laboratory, she maintained specimens ranging from the crystalline parasites of Vega Prime to the energy-consuming predators of the Andromeda colonies. Each creature represented a potential breakthrough in Zephyrian biotechnology, but none had fascinated her quite like the Earth animals acquired during the recent raid. The canines displayed remarkable intelligence, even under laboratory conditions. Their emotional responses to stress showed sophisticated neural pathways that suggested far more complex cognitive processes than standard xenobiology textbooks indicated. Most intriguingly, they seemed to understand that they were being studied, and their behavioral patterns suggested they were actively resisting her research protocols. Specimen 7 shows continued defiance of conditioning protocols, she dictated to a recording device as she observed the golden retriever in containment cell 12. The animal had refused food for 2 days, despite the introduction of stimuli designed to trigger feeding responses. Neural mapping indicates higher cognitive function than previously theorized. The dog looked up at her with eyes that seemed unnaturally aware, as if it understood every word. Zenthara made a note to investigate the possibility of genetic enhancement among Earth's domestic animal populations. Her research was interrupted by the blare of emergency alarms throughout the facility. Red lights bathed the laboratory in crimson shadows as the station's automated systems announced a security alert. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Unknown vessel approaching on attack vector. Zenthara frowned as she secured her specimens. The research station's location was highly classified, known only to senior military officials and the scientific staff. No unauthorized vessel should have been able to locate them, much less approach through the asteroid field that surrounded their position. Computer, display incoming vessel specifications. The laboratory's main screen flickered to life, showing long-range sensor data that made Zenthara's mandibles click together nervously. A single ship, heavily modified, broadcasting no identification codes. The vessel's configuration suggested Terran origin, but the weapon signatures were unlike anything in her database. Estimated time to engagement? 27 minutes at current approach speed. Zenthara activated her communication console and connected to the station's command center. Commander Yethmore appeared on screen, his usual composure replaced by barely controlled panic. "Doctor, we need immediate specimen transfer to the emergency evacuation pods, priority items only." "Commander, what's happening? Who is attacking us?" "According to fleet intelligence, we're dealing with a rogue Terran super soldier. Someone named Marcus Kane. He's been hunting our forces across Sector 7 for the past week." The name meant nothing to Zenthara, but the fear in the commander's voice was unmistakable. Military personnel weren't easily frightened, especially aboard a facility designed to withstand siege warfare. How can one human threaten this entire station? "Doctor, this isn't just any human. Marcus Kane destroyed 17 of our ships in 5 days. Our defensive systems are designed to stop conventional attacks, not..." Yethmore paused, consulting his tactical displays. "Not whatever this is." Through the laboratory's observation windows, Zenthara could see the incoming vessel growing larger against the starfield. As it approached, its true size became apparent. Larger than a fighter, smaller than a corvette, but bristling with weapon systems that seemed to violate several interstellar treaties regarding personal armaments. 20 minutes to engagement range, the computer announced. "Doctor, prioritize the Earth specimens for evacuation. Fleet Command has issued specific orders regarding those particular animals." Zenthara turned toward the containment cells, studying the various creatures she'd spent days cataloging. The Earth animals were certainly interesting, but hardly unique enough to warrant special evacuation protocols. Unless, Commander, exactly what happened during the raid that acquired these specimens? Yethmore's expression shifted, and suddenly Zenthara understood why the approaching vessel carried so much weaponry. The Earth animals weren't just research subjects. They were the reason Marcus Kane was coming to kill everyone aboard the station. "The raiders took his pets," she whispered. "Excuse me. These aren't random specimens, are they? These animals belong to specific humans. This Marcus Kane is coming to get them back." The communication channel fell silent for several seconds. When Yethmore spoke again, his voice carried the weight of dawning understanding. "Doctor, how quickly can you prepare the Earth specimens for transport?" Zenthara looked at the animals in their containment cells, seeing them with new perspective. Not research subjects, but family members of someone willing to wage war against an entire empire to get them back. The implications sent shivers down her Chitna's spine. 10 minutes if I skip standard preparation protocols. "And doctor? Don't sedate them. Something tells me they need to be conscious when we return them." As Zenthara began emergency specimen preparation, she found herself wondering what kind of being could inspire such devotion in another species. The Earth animals showed no sign of genetic modification beyond basic environmental adaptation, yet somehow they meant enough to a human super soldier that he would risk everything to save them. 15 minutes to engagement range. The approaching vessel had resolved on sensors, and the tactical display showed details that made Zenthara's research-oriented mind recoil in horror. The ship wasn't just armed, it was a flying weapons platform, loaded with enough firepower to sterilize small moons. And at its helm was someone who'd already proven his willingness to use those weapons against anyone who stood between him and his goals. "All defensive batteries online," came the announcement from the command center. "Prepare for incoming hostile." Zenthara worked frantically to prepare the animal specimens for transport, but part of her attention remained fixed on the approaching ship. As it drew closer, she could make out modification details that suggested someone with intimate knowledge of both human and alien technology. weapon ports that hadn't existed on the original design, sensor arrays that could penetrate most military stealth systems, and engine modifications that explained how a single vessel could outrun entire fleets. 10 minutes to engagement range. The station's defensive systems came online with mechanical precision. Plasma cannon turrets tracked the incoming vessel, while missile batteries prepared to launch coordinated volleys. The research station might be dedicated to scientific inquiry, but it was built to Zephyrian military specifications. Nothing short of a full battle fleet should have been able to threaten its defensive capabilities. Marcus Kane's ship continued its approach without deviating from course or responding to communication attempts. The vessel moved through the asteroid field with supernatural precision, avoiding obstacles that should have required constant course corrections. Either the pilot possessed inhuman reflexes, or the ship's navigation systems were beyond anything the Zephyrians had encountered. 5 minutes to engagement range. All personnel not essential to defense operations report to emergency stations. Zenthara finished loading the last of the Earth specimens into transport containers, her scientific mind cataloging details even in the midst of crisis. The animals seemed to understand that something was happening. Their stress indicators had actually decreased as evacuation preparations began, as if they somehow knew rescue was coming. The golden retriever that had refused to eat for 2 days suddenly became alert, its head turning toward the station's outer hull, as if it could sense the approaching ship. Other animals showed similar behavior, their emotional states shifting from despair to what her instruments registered as anticipation. "How do they know?" she whispered to herself. "Doctor, we need those specimens at the evacuation bay immediately." Zenthara activated the transport cart and began moving the animal containers through the station's corridors. Around her, emergency lighting cast everything in red shadows while personnel rushed to battle stations. The research facility had transformed from a place of scientific inquiry into a fortress preparing for siege. 2 minutes to engagement range. Hostile vessel refusing all communication attempts. Through the corridor's observation windows, Zenthara caught her first clear glimpse of Marcus Kane's ship. The vessel was beautiful in its own way, every line designed for maximum efficiency rather than aesthetic appeal. But it was the weapons that captured her attention. Advanced human technology integrated with alien improvements, creating something that existed beyond the normal classifications of space warfare. 1 minute to engagement range, all weapons free. Engage on sight. The first exchange of fire lit up the space around the research station like a miniature star. The station's defensive batteries opened up with coordinated volleys, filling the void with plasma fire and guided missiles. For a moment, it seemed like overwhelming firepower might succeed where tactical superiority had failed. Then Marcus Kane's ship began to dance. There was no other word for it. The vessel moved through the defensive fire with movements that seemed to violate physics, twisting and rolling in patterns that made tracking impossible. Missiles that should have connected harmlessly detonated against empty space while plasma bolts passed through positions the ship had occupied microseconds earlier. And then Kane began shooting back. His return fire was surgical in its precision. Instead of attempting to overwhelm the station's defenses, he targeted specific systems with weapons that seemed designed for exactly this purpose. Shield generators died under focused fire. Weapon emplacements went silent as their power couplings were severed. Communications arrays crumpled under impacts from projectiles moving at significant percentages of light speed. Defensive grid at 60% and falling. Came the announcement from the command center, though the strain in the speaker's voice suggested the situation was worse than the numbers indicated. Zenthara reached the evacuation bay just as the station's primary power grid failed. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in dim yellow illumination while backup systems struggled to maintain life support. Around her, the research facility's staff prepared for evacuation with disciplined efficiency, but she could see the fear in their movements. "Doctor, get those specimens aboard the evacuation ship immediately." Commander Yethmore appeared at the bay's entrance, his usually immaculate uniform torn and stained with fluorescent blood. Behind him, the sounds of continued combat echoed through the station's hull as Marcus Kane systematically dismantled their defenses. "Commander, what's our status?" "We're dead," he said simply. "He's not trying to destroy the station. He's disabling it. Every shot has been precisely targeted to eliminate our capability for resistance without causing catastrophic structural failure." Zenthara felt her thorax constrict as understanding dawned. Marcus Kane wasn't conducting a military assault. He was performing a rescue operation. The difference in tactics explained everything she'd observed about his approach and targeting patterns. "He doesn't want to risk harming the animals," she said. "Exactly. which means we have perhaps 5 minutes before he boards the station and starts looking for them personally. The evacuation ship's engines began their startup sequence, filling the bay with the high-pitched whine of charging plasma coils. Around them, essential personnel and critical research data were being loaded aboard with mechanical efficiency. But Zenthara found herself hesitating as she looked at the animal transport containers. "Commander, perhaps we should consider surrendering them."
What?
"The Earth specimens. If we return them immediately, he might allow the rest of us to evacuate safely." Yetmore stared at her, as if she'd suggested surrendering to a natural disaster. "Doctor, those specimens represent millions of credits in research investment. The scientific knowledge we could gain from studying them is worthless if we're all dead." The lights went out completely as the station's power systems finally failed. Emergency lighting provided dim illumination while the sounds of cutting equipment echoed through the hull. Marcus Kane had apparently decided that conventional boarding procedures were taking too long. 3 minutes until he reaches this section, someone announced over the emergency communication system. Zenthara made a decision that would save more lives than she could possibly know. Moving to the transport containers, she began activating their emergency release mechanisms. If Marcus Kane wanted his animals back, she would give them to him, preferably before he decided that lethal force was necessary to retrieve them. "Doctor, what are you doing?" "Saving our lives," she replied, opening the final container. The golden retriever that had refused to eat for 2 days looked up at her with eyes that seemed to hold far more intelligence than any animal should possess. For a moment, their gazes met across the vast gulf between species, and Zenthara felt something shift in her understanding of the universe. These weren't just animals. They were individuals, with their own thoughts and feelings and relationships. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the station, someone who loved them was coming to bring them home. The cutting equipment went silent. And in the sudden stillness they heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Too heavy to be Zephyrian, moving with the measured pace of someone who knew exactly where he was going and what he would find when he got there. Marcus Kane had arrived. And he was about to discover that not all aliens were monsters. The evacuation bay's blast doors peeled apart like flower petals under the concentrated heat of military-grade cutting tools. Through the widening gap came something that made the assembled Zephyrians instinctively step backward. The enhanced form of Marcus Kane, his combat suit scarred from recent battles and weapon systems humming with barely contained violence. He paused in the doorway, his helmet's optical arrays sweeping the bay with mechanical precision. For a moment that stretched into eternity, the only sound was the soft cycling of his armor's life support systems and the barely audible whimpers of frightened animals. Then his gaze found the open transport containers. "Doctor." Zenthara watched something profound happen to the human super soldier in that instant. The rigid posture of a professional killer softened almost imperceptibly. The weapon systems that had been tracking potential targets went silent, and when he moved toward the containers, it was with the careful gentleness of someone approaching beloved family members after a long separation. The golden retriever was the first to reach him, bounding from its container with a joy that needed no translation across species. The dog's entire body seemed to vibrate with happiness as it pressed against Marcus's armored form, tail wagging so hard it was almost a blur. "Hey there, Bailey," Marcus said softly, his voice carrying clearly through the bay's speakers. His armored hand moved with impossible delicacy as he checked the animal for injuries. "I know, girl. I know. We're going home now." One by one, the other animals emerged from their containers. A cat that pressed itself against his leg, purring loudly enough to hear across the bay, a small terrier that yapped with excitement until Marcus knelt to scratch behind its ears. Each reunion was a small miracle of pure emotion that transcended the barriers between species. Zenthara found herself transfixed by the display. These weren't the cold interactions she would have expected between a enhanced killer and research specimens. This was family coming home. "Commander Yethmore," Marcus said without looking up from the animals clustering around him. His voice carried across the bay with absolute authority. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." The commander stepped forward with visible reluctance. His forearms spread in a gesture of non-resistance. "The specimens have been treated according to standard xenobiological protocols. No permanent harm was intended." Marcus's helmet turned toward him, and even through the armored faceplate, the weight of his attention was palpable.
"These aren't specimens, Commander."
"They're friends. Family. And your standard protocols included confinement, stress testing, and preparation for vivisection. We were following established research procedures for unknown biological entities. Unknown? Marcus rose to his full height, the animal staying close to his armored form. Commander, these animals have been companions to humans for thousands of years. Their genetic codes are stored in every major xenobiological database. The only thing unknown about them was whether your people would have the wisdom to return them unharmed. Xanthara stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her survival instincts. Mr. Kane, if I may ask, why do these animals matter so much to your species? Our research indicates they provide no strategic military advantage, no economic benefit beyond basic companionship. Marcus turned toward her, and she found herself looking into optical displays that somehow conveyed more humanity than many biological eyes she'd seen. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of genuine emotion. Doctor, how much do you know about human evolution? Basic information from xenobiological databases. Tool use, social cooperation, aggressive expansion patterns. All true, but incomplete. Humans didn't evolve alone, Doctor. We formed partnerships with other species on our homeworld. Dogs helped us hunt. Cats protected our food stores from vermin. Horses carried us across continents. These relationships weren't just convenient. They shaped who we became as a species. He gestured to the animals around him, his armored hand gentle as he touched each one. These aren't just pets, they're partners in the truest sense. Members of our pack, chosen family, friends who ask nothing more than food, shelter, and love. And in return, they give us loyalty that transcends species barriers. Xanthara felt something shift in her understanding of human psychology. You're saying that your protective instincts extend to other species?
Not just extend to them, Doctor.
In many cases, our bonds with animals are stronger than those we form with other humans. They judge us not by our failures or our past, but by how we treat them in the present moment. For someone like me, Marcus paused, and she could hear the weight of memory in his voice. For someone who's done terrible things in the name of war, that kind of unconditional acceptance is precious beyond measure. Commander Yethmore shifted nervously. Mr. Kane, while this is enlightening, our orders regarding the specimens were quite specific. The scientific value alone is irrelevant. Marcus's voice cut across the bay with sudden authority. Commander, let me explain the new situation. Your raiders attacked a peaceful settlement, terrorized innocent civilians, and kidnapped members of their families. From my perspective, this constitutes an act of war. One settlement, 43 casualties, hardly a war. Marcus's laugh held no humor. Commander, I've destroyed 22 UPs in the past week. I've crippled your logistics network across 3-star systems. I've demonstrated that your military technology is inadequate to stop a determined human with personal motivations. If that's not war, what would you call it? The numbers hit the assembled Zephyrians like physical blows. 22 ships, by one human. The implications were staggering. However, Marcus continued, his tone shifting slightly, I'm prepared to end this conflict immediately under certain conditions. Commander Yethmore leaned forward eagerly. What are your terms? Simple. Complete withdrawal of Zephyrian forces from human-settled systems. Immediate cessation of raids against civilian populations, and formal recognition that birth origin animals are not to be considered valid targets for scientific research. Those are significant demands for the return of a few animals. Marcus knelt again, his armored hand gentle as Bailey pressed against his leg. Commander, you're thinking about this incorrectly. These aren't demands for the return of animals. These are the terms for ending a war that your people started and cannot win. You're one human against an empire. Yes, Marcus said simply. And in 1 week, that one human has proven capable of crippling your operations in an entire sector. How long do you think it would take me to expand that damage to your core systems? Xanthara watched the exchange with growing fascination. The human super soldier wasn't boasting. He was stating facts with the clinical precision of someone who'd already calculated the odds. And based on what she'd observed, those odds were probably accurate. Sir, one of the evacuation team leaders whispered to Commander Yethmore, incoming communication from Admiral Kexthara. The commander activated his personal communication device, and suddenly the bay was filled with the Admiral's voice. Commander, what's your situation? Admiral, Marcus Kane has boarded the station and retrieved his animals. He's negotiating. Commander, that human has destroyed half our fleet strength in this sector. What could he possibly want to negotiate? Marcus spoke up, his voice carrying clearly through the communication channel. Admiral, I want this war to end. Your people made a mistake. They attacked something they didn't understand. But mistakes can be corrected if everyone involved is willing to learn from them. There was silence on the channel for several seconds. When Admiral Kekstara spoke again, her voice carried a note of reluctant respect. Mr. Kane, you've demonstrated capabilities that frankly terrify our military command. If you're willing to end this conflict, we're prepared to listen. Excellent. Here are my terms. Complete withdrawal from human space, cessation of raids against civilian populations, and formal recognition that companion animals are protected under interstellar law. In return, I'll stop systematically destroying your military assets. Those terms are acceptable. But we'll need formal documentation, proper treaty negotiations through established diplomatic channels. Marcus's laugh carried genuine warmth for the first time since entering the bay. Admiral, I'm not a diplomat. I'm just someone who wants to take his friends home and get back to his garden. Draft whatever paperwork makes you happy. I'll be on Kepler 442C if you need to find me. He stood, the animals clustering around him as if sensing the conversation was ending. Oh, and Admiral? The next time your people encounter Earth animals in human settlements, remember this conversation. Because if I have to explain the concept of family bonds again, I won't be nearly so patient. As Marcus began moving toward the bay's exit, Dr. Zenthara found herself following. Mr. Kane, if I may ask, what will you do now? He paused, looking back at her with something that might have been surprise. Now, Doctor? Now I go home. I've got a garden that needs tending, a house that needs repairs, and friends who've been through a traumatic experience. My war is over. But the enhancement protocols, the weapons systems, won't your government want you to remain active? Marcus shook his head. Doctor, the most dangerous thing about human super soldiers isn't our technology or our training. It's that we choose when to fight. My government created me to be a weapon, but I decided to be a gardener instead. The only thing that changed that decision was someone threatening my family. He gestured to the animals around him, each one staying close to his armored form, as if afraid he might disappear again. These little guys remind me every day that there's more to existence than war and conquest. They don't care about my enhancement package or my combat record. They just want someone to throw a ball, provide food, and offer a warm place to sleep. In return, they give me something no amount of military technology can provide. Which is? Peace, Doctor. Real peace. Not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of something worth protecting. As Marcus and his rescued family disappeared into the corridor, Dr. Zenthara found herself reconsidering everything she thought she knew about human psychology. The most dangerous warrior in known space had just walked away from certain victory because his war was over. He'd achieved his objective, the safe return of creatures that most species would consider insignificant, and now he simply wanted to go home. Commander Yethmore approached her as the evacuation procedures resumed. Doctor, what did you think of his explanation? Zenthara watched the corridor where the human had disappeared, her scientific mind processing implications that would reshape xenobiological theory for generations.
I think, Commander, that we just learned why humans are the most successful species in the galaxy.
It's not their technology or their tactical abilities. It's their capacity for forming bonds that transcend biological barriers. They don't just conquer worlds, they adopt them. And once something becomes part of a human family, yes, they'll go to war with the universe itself to protect it. 3 days later, the Zephyrian Empire signed the Treaty of Kepler 442C, formally recognizing the protected status of companion animals in human space. The document was negotiated through proper diplomatic channels and signed by representatives of both governments. But everyone involved understood the real negotiation had taken place in a research station's evacuation bay between a super soldier and the animals he'd come to save. Marcus Kane never fired another shot in anger. He returned to his homestead on Kepler 442C, where he spent his days tending his garden and his evenings with the friends who reminded him daily that some things were worth any sacrifice to protect. And sometimes, when the purple sun set behind the crystalline mountains, visitors to the settlement would see him sitting on his porch with Rex and the other rescued animals, living proof that the most powerful force in the galaxy wasn't technology or tactics, it was love. The galaxy learned to remember that lesson, and, more importantly, it learned never to test it again.